When Germany saw the B-17 and knew they couldn't win, by 1943, the sky above Europe was no longer blue. It was gray with contrails, heavy with engines, and filled with a sound that every German soldier came to fear: the low, steady thunder of American bombers. They came in hundreds, then in thousands, and when the first formations of B-17 flying fortresses crossed into German airspace, the Luftwaffe understood that the war had entered a new phase. It was no longer about tactics or skill. It was about endurance and industry. The B-17 was not designed to be beautiful. It was designed to be relentless. Its shape was a contradiction: square edges, short wings, no elegance. But every line served purpose. It carried over 4 tons of bombs, flew higher than most interceptors could reach, and could take punishment that should have destroyed it. When the first intact B-17 was captured in France and shipped to the Luftwaffe's Rechlin Test Center, German engineers circled it in silence. They had seen many Allied aircraft before, British Spitfires, American P-40s, but this machine was different. It wasn't just an airplane. It was a factory made to fly. The B-17F they examined bore serial number 41 to 24,585. It had been forced down after losing an engine over Brest. The aircraft was riddled with holes, yet had managed to glide for nearly 100 kilometers before landing. When German test pilots inspected the damage, they were stunned. Control cables were doubled, systems redundant. The wings held layers of spars that could fail one by one without breaking the structure. The electrical system was shielded against shock. The engineers wrote in their report, "The American bomber demonstrates a design philosophy aimed not at perfection, but at persistence." Rechlin technicians measured everything: the precision of the rivets, the tight fit of the panels, the modularity of the parts. One note read, "The aircraft could be assembled by unskilled laborers." For German engineers, this was almost blasphemy. Their own bombers, the Heinkel 111, the Dornier 217, were built by craftsmen, each slightly different, each requiring hand adjustments. The B-17 was industrial art, standardized to the last bolt. Every component was numbered, interchangeable, replaceable. In it, Germany saw what they could not become: a nation of machines building more machines. The crew stations told another story. Inside, the cockpit layout was brutally efficient. The pilot's seats were wide, the controls large enough for gloved hands. Every gauge was marked in bold, easy-to-read print. The radio compartment sat just behind the cockpit, insulated from noise. Below, the bombardier station was a tangle of optics and wiring centered on the Norden bomb sight, a device so precise it could drop a bomb within 300 feet from 6 miles up. German technicians who tested it called it a miracle of mechanical logic. Their own Lot 7 sight, though advanced, could not match the automation or stability. Then there was the defensive armament: 13 Browning .50 caliber machine guns, in the nose, the tail, the belly, the sides, and the top. The Luftwaffe had never seen anything like it. A B-17 could throw a wall of lead in every direction at once. Each gun had heating coils for high-altitude cold, powered turrets controlled by hand grips, and quick-release drums that allowed gunners to reload in seconds. Even when German pilots approached from below, the classic attack angle, they found tracers waiting for them. Test pilot Hans Werner Lerck, who had also flown the captured Mustang months earlier, described the first flight of the B-17 with unease. "It feels like a city that has learned to fly," he wrote. "It turns slowly, reacts slowly, but it never stops." The Rechlin report concluded that while the fortress lacked agility, it had what no German bomber possessed: autonomy. Crews could navigate, communicate, and fight without ground control. In an air war increasingly dominated by chaos, that independence was priceless. By late 1943, these machines came by the hundreds. The Americans called it the daylight offensive. The Germans called it Tagesangriff des Todes, the daylight attack of death. At first, the Luftwaffe fought back with everything it had. Focke-Wulf 190s and Messerschmitt 109s climbed through the contrails, firing head-on into the bomber streams. The air battles were savage. Gunners fired until their barrels glowed red. Engines burned. Crews bailed out at 20,000 feet. Yet the next morning, the sky filled again. The real power of the B-17 wasn't its speed or its guns. It was repetition. American factories built one every hour. In Seattle, in Long Beach, in Burbank, entire cities worked day and night. Women assembled wings, students riveted panels, farmers turned into machinists. And while German production was collapsing under bombing, American output only grew. By 1944, over 7,000 B-17s were in service. German intelligence tried to understand how it was possible. Reports to the Luftwaffe High Command describe a war of machines, not men. The Americans had reached a point where the loss of 60 bombers in a single mission, 600 men, was acceptable. The German Air Ministry realized what that meant. Their opponents had industrialized courage. The raids grew bolder. Hamburg, Bremen, Schweinfurt, Regensburg. The heart of German industry burned. In August 1943, a single raid on Schweinfurt cost the U.S. 60 bombers, but destroyed half of Germany's ball-bearing production. The Luftwaffe claimed victory. The Americans called it a lesson. 3 months later, they came back with 300 bombers and long-range escorts. This time, Schweinfurt ceased to exist. Inside the Reich, morale cracked. Civilians hid in basements while the air shook with the tremor of falling bombs. Factories stopped. Railways twisted in heat. Even hardened officers began to understand that no defense could stop a sky made of steel. Hitler demanded miracle weapons. The Me-262 jet, the V-2 rocket, but none could outproduce the Flying Fortress. In January 1944, the Rechlin engineers received fragments of a B-17G shot down near Leipzig. They studied the damage. One wing had been shredded, the tail nearly severed, yet the aircraft had stayed airborne long enough for the crew to bail out. The report read, "The strength of this aircraft cannot be measured in armor or weapons, but in its capacity to survive." The Germans tried everything: heavy cannons, rockets, ramming units. None of it worked. For every bomber they destroyed, 2 more arrived. And now they had escorts, the P-51 Mustangs. The once proud Luftwaffe became prey. By spring 1944, the sky was a battlefield the Germans no longer controlled. B-17 formations moved like slow-motion hurricanes, accompanied by fighters that killed anything daring to rise. The psychological impact was worse than the bombs themselves. Soldiers on the ground stopped looking up. One Wehrmacht report recorded a captain's words: "We no longer fight for victory. We fight for delay." In Berlin, the Air Ministry held desperate meetings. Could Germany build a rival bomber? Could they create a fortress of their own? The answer was silence. They had neither the fuel, nor the manpower, nor the time. The irony was cruel. The same country that had invented strategic bombing in the 1930s now faced its perfected form, built by its enemies. The fortress represented everything the Reich had lost: industrial coordination, resource abundance, and the ability to fight a long war. By late 1944, the raids became daily routine. At noon, the sirens wailed. At 1, the horizon darkened. At 2, another city burned: Cologne, Dresden, Nuremberg. Smoke columns rose so high they pierced the jet stream. The German people began to call them Fliegenstadt, flying cities. There was a strange respect in the name. No one could deny their power. When the bombs fell, they weren't just destroying buildings. They were erasing the idea that Germany could ever win by sheer will. On the ground, captured airmen were stunned by how their enemies saw them. Interrogators asked not about strategy, but about production. "How many can your country make?" they demanded. The Americans smiled and said, "More than you can shoot down." The turning point came in early 1945. Allied bombing had shattered the German fuel network. Refineries at Luna and Politz lay in ruins. Without fuel, the Luftwaffe could not fly. The B-17s now faced no resistance. They flew in daylight, unescorted, unchallenged. German civilians watched as the bombers crossed the sky in perfect formation, knowing there was nothing left to send against them. When American ground forces captured Rechlin in April, they found the burned remains of the original B-17 test report. The final line had survived, typed in careful German script. This aircraft symbolizes the industrial might of a system that no longer fears loss. Against such a system, strategy is meaningless. That sentence was more than analysis. It was prophecy. After the war, German engineers who had studied the Flying Fortress joined American research teams under Operation Paperclip. They examined the same aircraft again, this time as students, not enemies. They admitted that what destroyed the Luftwaffe wasn't technology. It was repetition, organization, and endurance. The B-17 became a legend, but it was also a warning. It showed the world that victory in modern war doesn't belong to those who build the most advanced machines. It belongs to those who can build them forever. By the end of the conflict, 12,731 B-17s had been built. Nearly half were lost in combat. Yet the factories never stopped. Each one that fell was replaced within days. The wreckage that littered Europe wasn't defeat. It was momentum. In the skies over Berlin, even as the Reich crumbled, the fortresses still came. Their engines never faltered. Their wings never tired. They flew until there was nothing left to destroy. When the war finally ended and the last B-17 returned home, its logbook told the whole story. Missions flown, 142. Engines replaced, 3. Crew lost, 0. It wasn't just a record. It was a verdict. The B-17 Flying Fortress did not win the war by itself. But it proved that America's power was not just in courage or invention, but in something deeper, the ability to make the sky itself an industry. For Germany, the day they saw the B-17, they saw the future and the end.